Well, hello everyone, and today I am coming to you from Prince George County, Virginia, just outside Petersburg. Today I am here at the Petersburg National Battlefield. This is where the Siege of Petersburg um, started on June 15th. And this was a culmination of several battles, kind of starting with the Wilderness Campaign under Ulysses S. Grant. Um, and again, this is for me. This is where you see the end of the Civil War happening. From June 15th, 1864, to basically where the breakthrough happened, which we did a video at the Pamplin Historical Center and the National Museum of the Historical Civil War Soldier, which you have to see that video. We'll make sure we link that down below. So, so we're here today where the Siege of Petersburg. Now, this is run by the National Park Service. So this is a federal property. So we're going to take you around and show you a little bit of the Siege of Petersburg. So to kind of give you an idea of how it transpired for the Siege of Petersburg, started basically the wilderness, May 5th through the 6th, worked its way through Spotsylvania, through North Ann River, Topotomy Creek, Cold Harbor, finally ending in Petersburg. So this is basically the culmination of what Grant, trying to end the war. Of course, he had Sherman's March to the Sea going on at the same time, which basically just cut the Confederacy in half. But as we move over here, there's all these cannons. These are the different cannons that were used during the Siege of Petersburg. All different types of artillery pieces. And they're all marked. Siege, it's an 8-inch siege. So the Union definitely utilized several types of cannons. It's amazing the firepower that was used. Now we'll be heading over there, but over where the cannons are, which was a battery, which I'll explain that once we get down over there. But we're going to head into the visitor center. Masks, you do need to wear masks right now in the visitor center. There are bathrooms up here, so let's head on into the visitor center. So with COVID going on, you've got a nice board out here showing you what's going on. The Eastern Front, which is where we are. Grand Headquarters, which is the City Point, which is just which is inside the city of Hopewell. Then they're showing the visitor center's desks open. All right, so we are in the bookstore just as you enter. The visitor's desk is right here. You've got all sorts of trinkets and everything. The one thing cool that the Park Services does is if you have a passport, kind of like a National Parks passport, you can get it stamped. Of course, if you go to the different areas, there's City Point, P&B, Poplar Grove, and Five Forks. Now, unfortunately, due to COVID, they don't have the area open up there, but straight ahead you would have the theater, which would show you a little bit about the Siege of Petersburg. And basically it's a circle loop, kind of showing you some of the different artifacts that were found here, as well as kind of some of the things that were used during the Siege of Petersburg. Of course, we have some battle flags, 6 United States colored troops, which were supposed to be used during the crater, which we'll discuss the crater once we get out there. But showing you some of the items that they have for sale here are several books on the Civil War. And you got the mugs and everything, and the passports that I talked about are right here, which again, if you open up where you go, it even says, you know, if you go to National Capital Region, you get their stamp there. So really neat book if you like to go to a lot of the national parks. The little kids section. Getting your colored cappies, if you want to get your little mini Lego blocks. Walking staves. So, a small gift shop, but you know, nonetheless very nice. You can get some hooded sweatshirts, t-shirts. And then your postcards, little other small trinkets, your patches if you collect those. Of course, you know how wherever we go, we like to collect the pins, so we'll definitely begin a pin before we leave up here and head into the park. Alrighty, so real quick stop in there. Unfortunately, it's a shame that the inside part of the museum was not operational. But like I said, the film kind of goes through what the Siege of Petersburg, what went on here. So we are heading out to one of the batteries, which kind of, like I said, this right here was basically the start of the Siege of Petersburg. Where we are right now was originally part of the Confederate Line that was set up. And when the Union came in, the Union took over the position. The Confederates retreated, and needless to say, then the Union basically turned the guns towards Petersburg. So we're heading out to what's known as Battery 5, and then it's a short walk to the battery, but then we'll be doing a trail down to I think what was called the Dominator, a massive artillery piece. In fact, I'm going to turn around and go back. They actually had a picture of the Dominator, so I'm going to get back there. Okay, so I made it back to the Battery 5 picture, and basically something very similar to this. It was called the Dictator. I'm sorry, not the Dominator. But this massive shell or mortar just raid in artillery shells into the Siege of Petersburg. Now, at the start of the siege, this was the battle lines. This is where basically where you see the lines being drawn, and we're basically kind of, I think we're right around in this area if I'm trying to remember the map, but I think we're right in that area. So, all right, so now we're going to head to Battery 5. All right, so we are now up to Battery 5. This battery area was created by Captain Dimmick of the Confederacy. This was known as the Dimmick Line. This was originally a Confederate battery. So obviously the guns were trained away from Petersburg to stop advancing Union. Now, once the Union did take over this, the Union did come in and add earthworks, basically from about right here all the way around to where the entrance is. The Union built up these mounds because obviously now they are facing Petersburg. Petersburg is pretty much straight ahead, but there was several cannons here. Let me go up here and kind of give you a perspective Now, obviously, the ground's gotten a little bit higher and everything, but what's interesting is if you can see straight out right here, the way they've got the grass cut, and I love how they did it, they've basically got it to where the trenches were built for the Confederacy, the original Dimmick Line. So, yes, you got uncut grass right there, which doesn't mean anything, but here, this is where the trenches were. All right. Sorry about that. I actually didn't realize that the phone or it stopped recording. It is kind of hot today, so the phone does heat up. But yeah, so basically the Confederate lines pretty much became Union lines after the Union took over. So we are kind of heading now down the Dimmick Trail, hopefully. Looks like the trail is closed, so it looks like we're not going to be able to go that way. But yeah, so basically the guns that you see now are set up in the Confederate configuration. The Union, which built these earthworks right here, obviously the guns that maybe were captured and everything were turned around on the city of Petersburg. The downtown center is probably only about 1.5 miles away. So now we're going to go back out. We're going to go around down towards where the Dictator was situated. Now, as we're walking down the Dimmick Line Trail, here's a little bit more close-up of where the Confederate trenches were. Of course, now that's looking up into Battery 5. They had a kind of like a ditch dug out. Some of them were with soldiers in it. Some of them weren't. They were more for the stop soldiers from coming up. Which, when we get farther down into the battlefield, they do have a mock-up of what the earthworks did look like. So, but we are on our way down to the Dictator. Okay, so now we are at where the Dictator. This was a 13-inch mortar that just, although could lob shells probably about 2 miles. But this was the biggest artillery piece used during the Siege of Petersburg. So you can kind of see just how thick this was to where the actual shell was. But, now where we walked, if you go up and over that crest, we are right there at Battery 5. So these shells actually got lobbed over Battery 5. Now, the most typical mortar was about your 10-inch mortar. But this massive thing just lobbed 13-inch, steel into the city. Quite impressive. Now, this is not the actual, this is a mock-up of it. And then if we go down here, of course, after the Union, they knew they were going to be here for a while, so they built a powder magazine into, and this is the actual powder magazine. Obviously, you cannot get into it, but this is the actual, you go in, if you open that door, which I don't suggest it, that's, breaking and entering, but you go in there, it is a area where the shells and the powder, mainly the powder, was kept. And again, just built into the side of the hill. But kind of to give you a kind of perspective. Now, granted, a lot of these trees probably were not. Obviously, these trees were not here. Maybe some of these bigger ones, but the terrain that the Union forces had to come to get up here. There's a natural stream. You got high hills here, so the Union soldiers had to come down the hill, race up this hill. Now, granted, they were out of the sight of Confederate forces, but if you were Confederate forces, you'd be right at the top of there, just firing down on them. So between artillery and the constant charges, I mean, now granted, this was a surprise to the Confederate forces, because most of them, they were here and thinking they were safe. No, not so much. Here comes Grant. All right, so while we're walking back up to the car, a little thing. I mean, leading up to the Siege of Petersburg, Robert E. Lee had gotten used to basically fighting against Union generals who, let's just say, weren't the best. The Union generals, after battles, never really went after Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. So, so here comes Ulysses S. Grant, basically the victor of the West, and he basically had a policy. We're going to hit and we're going to keep going. We're going to keep following, which ultimately, starting in the wilderness, sorry, I'm a little winded. But the wilderness was just devastating for both sides. But Grant just kept pressing. He kept, where Lee could gather his forces again and everything, he wasn't able to. So ending up down here was, kind of like this was for me, this was the pitfall of, this spelled the end. Once Lee's army dug in, this spelled the end, because Grant was able to basically encircle. Now we're going back into the sun. Was basically able to surround Robert E. Lee. The Confederates put up a heck of a fight for a good year. Almost a year. And, with Sherman marching towards Atlanta to the sea, cutting off supply routes, it just, now the Northern Army of Virginia is laid in siege. It just spelled certain doom for the Confederates. The Union had the industrial might, which the Confederacy did not. They tried to get Britain on their side. They tried to get France to come on their side. Just didn't happen. But now what we're going to be doing, we're going to jump back in the car, and we're going to, got to cool down the phone, but we're going to head farther into the battlefield. One of the next stops, and there's some multiple stops on the way, but we're going to head up to where they have a mock up of basically what artillery positions look like, and then show you that and everything. One thing about the Petersburg National Battlefield has some wonderful trails. You can bike, walk. I think 12 miles of trails. So, but we're going to head back in the car because we're not going to walk all 12 miles, and we're going to head to our next stop. All right, as we're driving down to our next place, you stay to the right. You see the kind of the lane to the left that is set up for walkers and bike riders. So it's really nice that they have this set up. This is a one-way road, so once you go into the actual driving tour, you are in here until you get to the end. All right, so just before we get to the battery mock-up, this is Battery 8, known as Fort Friend. This was, again, part of the Dimmick Line, and this was a Confederate battery. And then by the morning of June 16th, basically a mile and a half of the Confederate works between batteries 3 and 11 were in Union hands. So all guns that were pointing that way by the Confederates were facing the other way by the next day. And this gives you kind of an idea of what it looked like. Of course, where you see you are here, that is exactly where we are standing. So batteries were pretty much lined up all the way through here, heading pointed right towards Petersburg. Okay, so kind of, for those who don't understand, Civil War tactics and everything, during the siege, you see like the batteries, which is just behind me, of Fort Friend. Now you have the batteries, but then a few hundred yards ahead of them would be the Union lines, or the infantry lines. So when the Confederates held it, their lines were a few hundred yards ahead of them. And then when the Union took it over, they built entrenchments a few hundred yards ahead of them. The infantry to protect the artillery. Now the artillery also protected the infantry. It was a necessary kind of arrangement where the artillery rained lead and fire down on the enemy from a distance, but the infantry were the ones that got up and close. So just kind of wanted to kind of put that information out. Okay, so now we are up to where Battery 9 is, which we'll walk up to Battery 9 in just a couple minutes. But kind of wanted to show you their mock-up of what these earthworks look like. So again, almost kind of very medieval like, where they would have knock trees down, and they would make these into spikes. And of course, this would deter infantry from going through it. Of course, they would set up again taking down trees, creating barriers to put dirt in front of. Places for mortars. And of course you would have infantrymen as well, stand at these positions. Powder magazine. Now if you do come here, just to let you know, especially during this time of the year, copperheads are out. Don't get too close to the earthworks, because the copperheads like to be in between all this. But you've got this kind of like a sniper's point. This gives you an idea of what it would look like looking over the ramparts. And of course, just over there you would have the more infantry trenches. All right, so now we're down at the trenches for the infantry, and of course they have stairways in there. And again, kind of looks like a World War I trench. They put timbers above them to act as a kind of like a protection from getting hit in the head, since obviously when they bring the guns up, their heads are exposed. But again, right behind them is the earthworks. All right, so I have walked out. I'm about a good 100 yards. Now, during the Civil War, I am within firing range of the Confederates. All right, so imagine Union soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, or even Confederate soldiers, depending on what battle you're looking at, marching shoulder to shoulder towards these earthworks being fired on by artillery pieces using possibly most likely canister at this close range. You've got infantry shooting at you. Then you're coming up. All right, so with the infantry shooting at you, I mean, you are charging these by now. You're going up as fast as you can to get up to these ramparts. And of course, you can't hardly see your enemy because they're covered with the line, with the wood over them, protecting them. You're jumping in with your bayonet, and it becomes hand-to-hand battle. It's just amazing. It's like I mean, basically prelude to World War I. All right, so we've walked back up from our nice little charge on the infantry and battery. So we're now coming back up to where Battery 9 is. Now, also up here they have mock-ups of basically the little shacks that these soldiers would build. Became very monotonous during the siege, because there's days where there'd be no firing, there'd be days where there was firing. So now the interesting thing about Battery 9 is this is where one of the United States colored regiments attacked Battery 9 and took it. So again, from Battery 3 all to 11, by the end of the first day, was in the hands of the Union forces. The path right down this way, that's actually an old road. That is Prince George Courthouse Road. So you had the battery literally facing right down the road. Of course, just like at any Civil War park, they have memorials. This one is to the U.S. colored troops of the James and Army of the Potomac, Siege of Petersburg, 1864 to 65. So it's really nice to see that, you know, they are mentioning the contributions of the colored regiments. And again, we're getting ready to head down towards the crater to where, again, a little bit of history where the colored troops would have made more history. Alrighty, so we are now up at Fort Stedman, probably only about just over a half mile, maybe a little bit more from where we were at Battery 9. And Fort Stedman, basically after just over 9 months of battle, Robert E. Lee was just trying to end the siege. So this is where he tried to do a kind of like a breakout, tried to end the siege and basically continue the war. Unfortunately, it was a pre-dawn attack, so he caught the Union by surprise. But the Union countered attacked, and this is where basically it was like the last ditch, basically the last full attack for the Confederate forces. I'm not saying that this spelled certain doom, because you never know what could have happened, but yeah. So right now, I just walked into what is known as Fort Stedman. So kind of just gonna walk up here and kind of give you an idea of the landscape. All right, so I am kind of at right where a couple of the cannons were on Fort Stedman, kind of looking out. And the Confederates, when they were attacking, actually had some little bit of some rolling hills, so they were kind of out of sight. But like I said, eventually, of course, just ahead of these cannons were artillery, or were the infantry. But imagine all these trees ahead of us were down. They're not even there because of 9 months of shelling and Union and Confederate forces knocking trees down. This was all open. but I can see how the Confederates used the rolling hills to hide themselves from the Union forces during the nighttime to get as close as they could to Fort Stedman. Now, I'm here with the plaque of what happened at Fort Stedman. Now, to put in also a context, this kind of makes a little more sense why Robert E. Lee wanted to attack Fort Stedman. This was the closest the Confederate lines was to the Union lines. It was only 300 yards. So, there was only 6 cannons here, 300 Union soldiers, which, from what I'm understanding, that's typical of every fort. But with the Confederate lines only 300 yards away, they could get up close. So I now understand why Robert E. Lee wanted to attack this position. But again, unfortunately, didn't quite work out. And that was March of 1865. So the breakthrough, the Union breakthrough, was only a couple weeks away. All right, Battery 11. Remember, by the first day of the siege, the Union had taken over batteries 3 through 11. So basically, Fort Stedman is right here. That is Fort Stedman, just ahead of us. Battery 11 was right here. So on the first day, from here all the way around for a mile and a half, was taken on the first day by the Union forces. Now again, the one cool thing they've done here is they've kept where the trenches were unmowed, so you have an idea where the trenches were. But yes, this is Battery 11. This was the end. By the end of the first day, this is the extreme left of the Union forces that they had conquered from the Confederate. Alrighty, so kind of going back a few months, the last place we were at Fort Stedman, we talked about 9 months later, the Confederacy, Robert E. Lee trying to end the siege. Well, we're going back now to July of 1864. The siege had only been going on for a couple months. And again, General Grant wanted to obviously end the siege even sooner. I mean, he wanted to win. So he devised a plan. A plan was brought to him about, hey, we have some Pennsylvania coal miners, and they can dig a tunnel. We can pack it with explosives and blow it up. Blow up the Confederate lines. So we're back here at Fort Morton. Fort Morton, where basically the Confederate line, and you can see behind me, all the way out in the distance, where that big tree is, that's the Confederate lines. We're on the Union side. That's the Confederate line where that big tree is. So Grant had his generals devise a plan. The Pennsylvania coal miners, I'm walking over here to the shade, devised a plan to tunnel, pack it with explosives, and blow it up. Well, what Grant wanted to do was, I want to create a diversion attack. There we go. So again, Confederate lines are all the way out there. Right there's the tree. So he created a diversion attack on Richmond. Now, when he created that diversionary attack, that caused Robert E. Lee to take troops out of the line and head up to Richmond. Ultimately, the amount of troops Lee took out only left about 18,000 troops left here. It's really hot today, that's why you see a lot of sweat. So the diversionary attack, it worked. It took enough troops out of the line. Grant's Pennsylvania miners built their tunnel, packed it with explosives, and they detonated. This is known as the Battle of the Crater. And if you watch the movie Cold Mountain, I think it was with Jude Law and Renee Zellweger. You see Jude Law's character during the Civil War. He was at the Battle of the Crater. Okay, now here's where the Battle of the Crater kind of took a interesting turn. The attack was supposed to be conducted by the U.S. Colored Regiment. They had trained, they had practiced. There's a wonderful book out talking about this, and I cannot remember what the title of the book is. If you know what the book is, give me the title in the comments. But it talked about the training and the meticulous work they went through. I mean, they went through training scenarios and everything. So now, the way these colored troops, they were trained to go around a ditch, basically. They had the axes, they had the ladders and everything, and, you know, they didn't understand what they were being trained for, but it came to light once they were told, hey, this is going to happen. And again, they have been trained to go around a hole. Basically, at the 23rd hour, just before the attack, Union generals got scared, because if it worked, then it wasn't white regiments that would be given the acclamation. It was an all-colored regiment. If it didn't work, well, you led an entire black regiment to slaughter. So it became very political. So they decided, 23rd hour, and trying to remember, I think it was George McClellan. It was McClellan or Meade. I can't remember. Of course, remember Meade and McClellan were actually were generals of the were in charge of the Army of the Potomac at one time. Well, at the 23rd hour, just before the attack, they changed it up. They took the colored regiment off the attack and put white regiment. The problem is these white regiments had not been trained. They were not trained to do this attack. So, on the morning, they blew these explosives. I mean, from what I understand, they could hear the explosion all the way up in Richmond. Confederate soldiers, rifles, artillery pieces blew into the air. And this happened right behind me. Right behind me at the Confederate Lines is the crater, which we're going to go to. When this happened, those Union soldiers, they moved forward. Problem is, again, they were not trained like the colored regiment. They went into the crater and basically ultimately bottlenecked them instead of going around like they should have, because their goal was to get to a church on the other side of the line. So these Union soldiers, not trained in this attack, went into the hole. Next thing you know, the Confederates, once they got through all the shock and everything of what just happened, they literally just went to the top of the hole and started shooting and even throwing their rifles like spears at these Union soldiers. This Union regiment was wiped out. Honestly, that was a military blunder. If they would have let the colored regiment do their job, I think then that the Siege of Petersburg would have ended, and which only a couple months in to the siege would have been over. Because if you think about it, only 18,000 soldiers left in Petersburg because Lee took a few thousand out of the line to go towards Richmond. So, huge blunder by Grant's generals for doing that. And I'm a Union guy. Yeah, I'm originally from Ohio, so I'm Union. But this was a folly. There was other follies in the Civil War and everything. Burnside's Bridge at Antietam kind of rings a bell too. But anyways, that's another thing. But if they would have allowed the regiment who had trained for this, the Siege of Petersburg would have been over. Just a matter of a couple months. So, but yeah, just imagine being here in July of 1864 when they let that thing go. Had it been an awe-inspiring sight, it probably looked like hell just went up. So, but now we're going to come from the Union lines. We're going to drive over to the Confederate lines and show you what's left of the crater. Obviously, it's filled in over the years, but also they have still where the tunnel was. So we're going to show you that. So let's head on over. All right, so we are now over on the Confederate lines. There's two trails you can take. You can go straight to the crater or to the crater via the tunnel. We are going via the tunnel, so let's head on over. All right, so now we have walked all the way down here. We are now at basically the Union front of the line. This is the picket line. The front, basically kind of the front trenches, where we just were at Fort Morton, all the way out there. That was where we were, Fort Morton. So you're thinking, well, how could they build a tunnel all the way from over there? They actually built the tunnel over here. So this is where the extreme front of the Union line was at the time of the Battle of Crater. So if we take a look, let me walk more onto the Union side. So again, this tall grass, that is where the line was. The tall grass just ahead of us, where the big tree is, that is the Union, or that is the Confederate line. So at the morning of the attack, the Union regiments during the night came up behind this little hill right here, and basically hid behind the picket line. And right in front of us is where the crater was. So now we're going to walk down the trail, right on down to here, where the tunnel is. All right, so now we are officially at the entrance to the tunnel that these Pennsylvania coal miners built. Now, where we were just up over that little rise right there, but we came all the way down here. And the nice thing is you can walk up right to. So we're going to walk right up here. Now, again, just over that rise is the Confederate line. So imagine these coal miners having to, being able to build this, as quietly as possible is amazing. Now, obviously, it's been walled off, but I'm not going to get too close because I don't know what's in there, but that's all the room that they had. I'm 5'8", and it probably only goes maybe 5 feet tall. But they dug this over a matter of weeks in preparation for this. Just an awe-inspiring sight. And of course, a lot of the dirt had to go somewhere. It came all the way back here. But just, the amount of work that they put in. So this is actually really nice, the fact that you're able to actually come down to the crater, but or down to where the tunnel began. Amazing feat of engineering on these coal miners. So now we're going to head up the trail here, up to the Confederate line, to where the crater is. Alright, so we're now back up at the Union lines on our way up to the Confederate lines. Now, again, something that I love that the National Battlefield Park Service has done out here is they did not mow the grass of where the tunnel is. So you can see where the tunnel started. Now, what's interesting enough here, to create ventilation, they actually built a little bit of a fire. Of course, it's on the picket line, so the Confederates would probably really have no idea what it was. They think there's just a cooking fire. They built a fire underneath, which was, I guess, a miner's little trick to create air. The fire would break out the stale air and bring in new air. This was about 100 feet in. But again, here it follows. Now, obviously, because the tunnel has collapsed, so it's been, so right here you can see where, the ground sunken in because the tunnel collapsed. But the tunnel, again, just follow the uncut grass right up to the Confederate lines. All right, so now we are at the Confederate line. Just ahead of us, right here, that is where the tunnel is. The tunnel still kept coming right underneath where I'm standing. And again, all the way out there is Fort Morton. And just about about right there, that's the picket line. So the Confederate soldiers, again, would have no idea. Completely clueless. But the tunnel came up, came right over here, and you're probably thinking about 300 yards of digging to this point. To the crater. So they ended here. And of course, the video does not do justice. I'm sorry. But this obviously has filled in over the years. But just the amount of explosion. And it came just shy of an artillery battery. If they would have if they would have got any closer, you figure if they would have blown that there, the gunpowder that was right there would have gone off. Probably even caused a bigger explosion. Like I said, this would have been deeper after it exploded. But now imagine, after it exploded, you figure they probably took a couple minutes to let this dust settle, and the Union soldiers, the Union regiments that were that were thrown into this right at the last minute. Again, it was a colored regiment that was supposed to be taking part in this. Started attacking, and of course, the Confederates that were all right around here were passed out, confused, wounded, dead. Here comes the Union soldiers. Again, they weren't trained to go around the crater. They went into the crater, and of course, you figure right there's where batteries were. You figure that the Confederates at least put a cannon there with grape shot and fired it in. But imagine being a Confederate soldier just looking down here at the sea of blue uniforms. Just basically, it was like a turkey shoot. again, huge mistake. It could have ended the war sooner, but it just awe-inspiring. Now, as I'm walking around, I do want to mention this, that the colored regiment that was supposed to attack was still in the area. They were put in reserves, and when this happened, they were waiting to attack. Now, they were just ahead of Fort Morton, kind of to the left, but they were just waiting. They were like, put us in. And eventually they started seeing the wounded and the mortally wounded coming back, and they were never put in. Again, huge folly on the Union. But now I'm walking around to kind of show you where kind of the objective was for the Union. All right, so on the other side of this camera is the crater. So here's the crater. There's the Confederate battery. Behind me, and you can probably see some of the cars in the distance, that is known as Crater Road. Just about somewhere over here is a cemetery with a church. The Union, the colored regiment, when they were, and of course then became the Union, the white units' responsibility, their objective was to get through around the crater and make it to the church. If they would have made it to the church, they would have broken the Confederate lines. Now, granted, you're probably thinking that's probably about a half-mile run. Would have, with the way this explosion was, it would have caught the Confederates completely off guard, which it did. Of course, at the time there was a faint movement up towards Richmond by Grant. So less troops. The breakthrough would have happened here. But the Confederate soldiers here, I believe, were from South Carolina. If I remember seeing the memorial from South Carolina, their counterattack was brutal. Many of the Union that attacked the crater were killed, wounded, or captured. Again, huge folly by the Union. Again, politics played a play. They didn't want, a colored regiment to receive accolades for, basically ending the war, because these Union generals knew if this would have happened, the Civil War would have ended, and they didn't want the accolades to go to a colored regiment. Horrible decision on their part. And the thing is, they didn't think about this until the last minute. That's why they were like, "Oh, we can't do this. We got to put a white regiment." So, but yeah, so this is how close we came to the end of the Civil War, just a month or two after the siege had started. Lee's attack on Fort Stedman would have never have happened 7 months later. So, again, it's a huge folly. I could talk about this all the time. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. But you got to remember, at the same time, Sherman's march to the sea. He had burned Atlanta, cut the supplies off, so Lee had no supplies coming north from the south. So, folly. Huge mistake. But anyways, but they were that close. So that's about gonna do me here at the Petersburg National Battlefield, operated by the U.S. Park Service. Didn't stop at all the locations. Of course, there's 12 miles of trail. Didn't stop at the 12 miles. But definitely highly recommend you come in here and checking this out for yourself, especially on a beautiful day like this. Now, granted, you can see it. I'm sweating. It's 90 plus already at just after noontime here. But great place to walk, learn about the history. But I thank you for joining me. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell for when we you get notifications when we post videos. So with that being said, hope you all have a good one. We'll see you on the next review.